1 Timothy, the first of the pastoral epistles and one of the last books Paul likely ever wrote. But it wouldn't be a canonical book if scholars hadn't spent the last 100 years debating over whether this book is actually authentic. Did Paul really write the book? If he did, then when? And why does it seem like there's 2nd century Gnosticism in a 1st century book? And can women really be saved by having babies? Well, these are just some of the problems that have peppered the pages of many prominent people in the past century. That's a lot of peas. But to gain some better insights about what might have been happening around the time 1 Timothy was written, we're going to take a little trip to Ephesus. Come on. Well now, the first question we might ask about 1 Timothy is to who was the book written? And as the name suggests, and as the introduction of the book suggests, 1 Timothy was likely written to be read by the pastor Timothy himself. You see, while Timothy might be the main recipient of the book, it's also about the rest of the church. See, Paul labours the fact that Timothy is credible and he is worthy of leading your church, and so you guys need to follow him. And he establishes some of these facts by Timothy's true doctrine, by calling Timothy his own child in the faith, and by so much other stuff. And so basically what Paul is establishing is that Timothy is a worthy leader and that he should be the shepherd, in fact, for those people at Ephesus. Boy, there's not too much left of old Ephesus, is there? Let's go move on and we'll see what else we can find. Did I do that? Now, the problem of who wrote the book of 1 Timothy wasn't really a concern until the mid-19th century, when problems such as stylistic differences and historical discrepancies began to come into light. And at that point, it was that scholars started to question, did Paul actually write this book? And so the questions of authorship remained relatively unchallenged until the 19th century. And then we had these problems being addressed, what about the stylistic differences? What about the historical context? Things like that. And probably because these books are pastoral epistles, there needed to be some stylistic differences between Paul's earlier writings and what we have today. But guys, there's no need to worry, because although there's great objections to Paul's authorship, there's also great answers to these objections, which means you've got to do some hard work. The ball is in your court. Go along! Where'd they go? Oh, there you are. As far as dating the book of 1 Timothy, there seems to be two prominent views. The first one is that it was written at the time described in Acts 20 verses 1 to 6. And that says, after the uproar ceased, Paul sent for the disciples, and after encouraging them, he said farewell and departed for Macedonia. When he had gone through those regions and had given them much encouragement, he came to Greece. There he spent 3 months, and when a plot was made against him by the Jews as he was about to set sail for Syria, he decided to return through Macedonia. Sopater, the Berean, son of Pyrrhus, accompanied him, and of the Thessalonians, Aristarchus, and Secundus, and Gaius of Derbe, and Timothy, and the Asians, Tychicus, and Trophimus. These went on ahead, and they were waiting for us at Troas. But we sailed away from Philippi after the days of unleavened bread. And in 5 days we came to them at Troas, where we stayed for 7 days. And so there is one view that says this was the events that led up to Paul writing 1 Timothy, which would have been late 50s AD. Now there is a second, more prominent view that scholars seem to adopt a little bit more often. And that is that after the book of Acts finishes, Paul was released from his Roman imprisonment and he set sail for his 4th missionary journey to Spain. And it's said that in this time, Paul likely wrote the book of 1 Timothy as well as Titus. Let me out! Let me out! Don't worry, I'm not actually chained, so don't go send him help. Now, if it is true that Paul wrote after leaving the Roman prison for the first time, then that means he got out of prison in AD 62 and was persecuted under the Nero persecution in AD 68. This leaves about a 6-year window for Paul to have written his first. Now, going on this information, most scholars will date 1 Timothy to sometime between AD 64 and AD 66. Now this might account for some of those stylistic differences and historical discrepancies that we spoke about earlier. You see, some time had elapsed between Paul's earlier writings and the writings that we get in the pastoral epistles. And so this may account for slightly different language and different circumstances which were around in Paul's time of writing. Now the structure of the book of 1 Timothy. There seems to be about as much consensus on the structure of the book as there is left of the Temple of Artemis. Not much at all. And so what then happens is you get some commentators sort of structuring the book in a thematical sort of way, and then you get other commentators structuring it in a more exhortational way. How do we deal with false teachers? Which brings me to my next... And so no matter how you divide up the book, it seems at least best that we see the whole book in light of what Paul says in chapter 3. He says, I write these things to you so that you may know how to act in the household of God, which is the pillar of truth. And moving on to interpretive challenges in the book. As with any book, we have to look at the writing that's given and we have to make some assumptions. And so, doing a bit of this shadow reading, we come to see that they were probably dealing with something that looked like an early form of Gnosticism. Although Gnosticism wasn't around until the mid-2nd century. And so this has caused scholars to again ask, is this an authentic Paul writing? But Craig Blomberg, in his helpful book, Pentecost to Patmos, he suggests that it's more likely an early Hellenistic belief that had crept in, or perhaps an influence of a number of beliefs that had crept in to the church and were causing disharmony. And so the question remains, what was this belief system? Now in chapter 2 of the book, we come against this verse that seems to suggest women can be saved through childbearing. And so some interpretations maybe see this as physical preservation through the process of having a child, while other commentators see this as the salvation being brought through the line of Eve through Christ Jesus himself. And so two other more common questions that arise from the book of 1 Timothy is, can men and women be deacons and pastors? And second, can we lose our salvation? Paul says about those who will fall away from the faith. These are some more things to wrestle with in the book of 1 Timothy. Sounds like quite an exciting book you're talking about there, John O'Callow. John O'Callow? Well, I guess that's the book of 1 Timothy for you. Well, there you have it. Well guys, I just want to sincerely say thank you for coming with me on this walk through Ephesus. We've seen some of the authorship, some of the historical settings, some of the interpretive challenges and the structures of the book, and I hope that will be helpful to you, along with the assistance of those pages that are in front of you. Well, thanks for joining with me on another episode of Living World.